morning, everyone. Today I will be presenting my doctoral research on Hiromi Uehara, a Japanese composer-pianist who crosses the international boundaries of both genre and generation. To preface, my discovery of Hiromi was in about 2020 when an extended family member, a cousin of mine, learned her most famous piece, The Tom and Jerry Show, and I was like, I would like to play this piece. So I learned this piece, and then I fell in love with her works, and so for the past 6 years I've been making my way through her solo piano repertoire. The title of my lecture document, Whimsy within Virtuosity, describes a bit of how Hiromi approaches the piano and what virtuosity is within the scope of solo piano repertoire. But first, we will explore how jazz made its way over to Japan and some of the contributions of Japanese jazz musicians. So this is a very, very quick, brief overview of how jazz made its way over to Japan. So in the turn of the 20th century, in the 1910s, jazz was introduced to Japan by way of American boats or luxury passenger liners that carried live orchestras that would play jazz on board, and by record distribution, so vinyls and things like that. Well, I guess pre-vinyls, but physical music distribution was the way that Japanese people started to introduce themselves to this foreign music. After the tail end of the 1920s, jazz became associated with the newer generation of adults, and then the inception of casual listening lounges, which are called Tykeson, and dance halls became quite popular. And then as the World War started to start, American soldiers that were stationed in Japan continued to demand live jazz as a reminder of home. In the 40s and 50s, jazz was targeted as a part of anti-American sentiment and entered a period of basically prohibition. People were forced to turn in their jazz records to the government, and jazz became an underground interest. This lasted from about the 40s to early 50s, but the rest of the 50s spent rebuilding visibility for jazz. In the latter half of the century, American jazz musicians began touring more overseas, leading to more opportunities for performance and recording collaborations between Japanese and American ensembles. In the 80s and 90s, we start getting fusion genres between pop and rock, and Japanese musicians were starting to go over to the United States for education at very famous jazz schools. So overall, attitudes towards jazz in Japan have shifted back and forth between caution to celebration. Japanese musicians have faced a lot of scrutiny from academics and critics alike about the authenticity of their music, with common feedback detailing their alleged stiffness in performance, inability to improv, or supposed lack of cultural awareness. These critiques were often baseless and relied on stereotypes to carry an image that Japanese jazz was not a legitimate form of jazz due to its stark removal from Western European music standards. Now in the 21st century, as we're a quarter of the way in, Japan is now one of the major powerhouses for producing highly visible jazz musicians and composers, and I bring to your attention a special emphasis on jazz orchestras and the film and video game music industry. Jazz occupied a large space within Japan, with its mainstream appeal and many subdivisions within the culture itself. While its history is intertwined with major geopolitical events, at its heart, it has resonated really well with the Japanese people and culture, and it's a highly celebrated art form. So, where can you hear jazz in Japan? I mean, a lot of places, but the mediums in which you'll commonly encounter jazz in Japan are Jazzukisa. So this is a picture of one such listening lounge where you can kind of see it's a bar, and then there's a bunch of vinyls, and so you go there to drink and to listen to jazz together. And the owners of the bar may curate some of that music, or they may have outsiders or people that they hire to curate such playlists. Obviously in the concert hall, this is a picture of the Blue Note Tokyo All-Star Jazz Orchestra. In film, TV, and anime, this is a film that came out a few years ago that Hiromi composed the score for, and it's a film about jazz and about jazz musicians. That's just a little nod to Porcorosa because I also love Joe Hisaishi and his contributions to both orchestral cinematic music and jazz in this particular film. And then in video games, this is just like a screen recording realize it's going to take too long, but this is where you're most commonly going to see jazz from Japan making its way over to international acclaim. Okay, so now that we've established the broader context for the historical significance of jazz within Japan, I turn your attention towards the subject of my research, Hiromi. Hiromi was born March 26, 1979 in Hamamatsu, Japan. In her childhood, she studied piano under a classically trained teacher, and in Japan, she used to write jingles as a commercial artist for car companies like Hyundai and Honda. Not that I could find any samples of them. I'm sure that maybe she has that in her personal archive, but it is not publicly available. In 1999, she moved to the US to study at the Berwick College in Music, and her major was jazz arrangement and composition. And then slightly before she graduated in 2003, she landed a record deal with Telemark Records, and now she's touring all over the place. She's been quite an international sensation. Nowadays, she releases a studio album just about every year and tours extensively with her own band. So this is a deep cut. I had to find I had to go through like a Japanese documentary to find a very, very old picture of Hiromi with her teacher. Noriko Hikida is her name. No biographical information really exists about her other than her connection to Hiromi. So just I have a name and a picture, and that's about it. And then her primary teacher in composition while she was at Berkeley was famed jazz legend Amar Jamal. So Hikida's teaching emphasizes on a genre-less listening and music appreciation, and then Jamal's teaching in composition specifically is about emphasizing classical technical studies early on, like if you're familiar with the piano exercises of Czerny, Helen, things like that. Jamal also coined the term jazz as American classical music. This is something that he's contributed to the larger academic canon. And then also the concept of silence or rests in music as a form of discipline, like playing with expectations. So Hiromi, like a lot of artists, draws a lot of inspiration from sources all over. But in terms of her composition specifically, she draws primarily from the artists Chick Corea, Oscar Peterson, and Errol Gardner. These little lines are just talking a little bit about what the general contributions are of each artist, but actually what I decided to do is show clips of Hiromi speaking herself about each of these influences in her life. So I'm going to play 3 slides, and then you'll hear her talk about each of them.
It's our first time to play together. Yeah, we met each other 10 years ago? Yeah, 10 years ago. I remember very clearly a meeting with little girl who played amazing piano. And then I didn't meet Hiromi anymore. I forgot, really, until a friend gave me one of her CDs and he said, "You must listen to this young lady play the piano." And then I listened and I said, "Who's this crazy lady?" And then I found out it was the same girl. She's one of my favorites.
Yeah, quite the high honor from Chick Corea, and then they later went on to record a live duet album in 2006, just simply called Duet.
Yeah, well, this is in 2008, when I heard the sad news, and there was a tribute concert for Oscar, and I wanted to write something for him, so I wrote this piece called Oscar's New Camera, because he loved cameras so much, and whenever he had cameras in his hand, he was like a little kid, and when I was on tour with him in Japan, every day he was showing me new cameras. He got like, ding, look, and he just looked so happy, and I just wanted to capture that very precious moment that I had with him, so that I can just remember all my life. And from that tour.
Okay, yeah, the clip is quite long, so I only did part of it, but essentially, Hiromi and Oscar toured together in the early 2000s. They did a few shows. And then after Oscar Peterson passed, his wife released a tribute album that got a lot of jazz artists together, including Hiromi, and she composed 2 pieces. One is called Oscar's New Camera, and then the second one is, I forgot the name of it, but they're both on his album and they're nowhere else. So these are just like one-off pieces that she composed before she started to really get into solo piano composition. And then the last book will be about Earl Gardner and Helen.
You have to do these scales, but I was 7 or 8, and I was falling asleep.
Right.
So I was like playing. And my piano teacher said, just play like yo. What do you mean? I play with Springfield. Then okay, I try. Oh, that's a little more fun,
Yeah.
you know. And put some chords and harmonize, and then started to play like.
You did not harmonize it like that. I know that.
It made me a little more simpler, but that made me feel, oh wow, there's so much freedom.
I personally like that she managed to make Helen sound like Christmas music. That sounds Christmassy. Okay. So this is a diagram that I made for my lecture document, and I've copied it here. This details some, not all, but most of the compositional performance influences on Hiromi as a musician in person. It is a representation of the far reach between different styles of music and how they've impacted her work. And I use different colors and arrows to represent both style, pedagogical relations, and sort of indirect or direct influence. So the green circles denote a student-teacher relationship, so that's why Ahmad is the only one in green, because that's the one that she directly studied under, and those red arrows are just continuations of the student-teacher relationship. The lavender circles are all classical composers. The cyan circles are jazz composers or musicians. Well, yeah, they're all musicians, composers. And then the dotted orange line are mentions from interviews or other publications where they have gone on record to say, oh, this person has inspired me. And then the solid black lines are like direct performance or career collaboration. So, for example, Hiromi never met Oscar, or she never met Earl Gardner because they were not from the same generation, but she did work with Oscar Peterson and she did play with Chick Corea, and then Chick Corea played with Miles Davis, and then you can see all these influences here. So this is the context that I am presenting in order to dive deeper into her works. So for this purpose of research, I am only focusing on her solo piano compositions. While the majority of her work is written for ensemble, my experience as a scholar has been studying her solo works for my own performance and personal enjoyment. So I'm going to start by talking about the Tom and Jerry Show. This is Hiromi's first solo piece that has been published as far as we know. It was composed during her time at Berkeley, and it's still her most popular work. There are countless recordings and performances on YouTube and other streaming platforms. The narrative structure follows the classic cartoon of Tom the Cat and Jerry the Mouse chasing each other around, and Hiromi has frequently revised and re-improvised this work in performance from 2000 to now. This is just a quick comparison of the first official publication of the score. It looks very different from the one that is officially published by Alfred and Yamaha. They changed the rhythm. This is like 16,000 and they went to 8,000 and they didn't do the repeat sign. So just some slight notational differences, but I mean it's the same material and the same music. I think the tempos are a little different because they changed the rhythm. So this says quarter note is 162 and then that says half note is 160. Still insanely fast. So instead of opting for a traditional music theory approach of doing chord by chord analysis, I've chosen to do sort of a narrative analysis using character animation. So I will demonstrate this section in a bit, but I want you to imagine that the right hand is Jerry and the left hand is Tom, and they move together, and Tom is trying or vice versa, which create this sort of breathless feeling. There's also some scalar-based repetition where she has a melody that's strung together by the first notes of each group. And then in the left hand, the stride piano rhythms that are from the time of Errol Garner and Oscar Peterson are very present in this piece. There's a lot of score difficulties for the performer, which I will demonstrate shortly, but there's also this question of this green circle of to slow down or not to slow down, which we will get into in a second. So I think I have this. I'm going to play it under tempo, just so you can hear this, because we're going to hear a bunch of other clips of people playing this very fast, and this is the only time that it's going to be slow and digestible. So. Which is very difficult for the pianist to do. I often find myself like locking part of my hand in order to get it clean, we're about to hear this at blinding speed from other people, but it is incredibly difficult to get the thumb and the fingering in that particular section. So this is just one of the many virtuosic things that Hiromi does that is also very difficult for most performers, for all, I would say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a bunch of clips of the same passage of music and sort of talk about the interpretational differences that people have taken. The first is, we're going to start with the control sample, which is the studio recording. Sample, or if she did this all in one take. That's not information that is publicly available. So, a variety of interpretations exist for this particular passage. Here's one such professional pianist taking a stab. But it took me a few times to listen to this. I'm not going to replay it, but in the part that he just did with the fourths, he actually cuts out the thumb entirely. So he's not playing like half the notes, he's just playing the fourths, which I think was a choice that was made in order to preserve clarity and texture. But he isn't technically playing all the notes, so do with that what you will. Here's a collegiate pianist playing the same thing. Slower than the original tempo, but clear, and he's playing all the notes, so different priorities are being chosen here. Also, a lot of children play this piece, so it was difficult for me to pick one to really represent it, but here's just one kid playing. By children, they either change it altogether because it's so hard and it's difficult for little hands to play, but it is admirable that they are taking a stab at it. And I think also this piece in particular is, the only reason I would say it's child-friendly is because it references in cartoon, so it's easier for children to pick up on the narrative Here's me playing it in 2021 for my jury to get an idea of like why this is still so crunchy sounding, especially in the fourths. Yeah, but I feel vindicated because there are also recordings of Hiromi also crunching through the same chords. We're going to hear two of them, two different Hiromi performances. So the first one is a live performance, and then the second one you will hear new material in the same spot. I'm just saying that not everyone has a good day necessarily, and I feel that very deeply in my soul that sometimes the writing just does not come out, no matter how well you are, no matter how much time you spend as a musician drilling over it, sometimes it just locks up. But here's the last one where she adds something new and different. You probably noticed that she has a very particular face when she's playing. We will talk about that towards the end of the presentation and her theatrical style. So I just gathered some clips mainly just to show a small sample of how people grapple with this challenge. And I think that this piece is sort of a representation of, she's playing this music for herself, so there wasn't really the intent of other people learning this, but now it's become so popular that many people consider this a rite of passage piece in the sense that its difficulty is up there with many of the popular classical pieces that we know today. So, I'm going to start with her first solo album in 2009 called Place to Be. This album is themed around locations, so mostly physical ones that she toured in, so some cities, but some are abstract, like the title track is called Place to Be. Who knows where that place is? It's just a title. But this is the album of her 20s, so it's represented by extreme, high energy playing, impulsive improvisational sections, a lot of references to styles like pop, classical, minimalism, even extended piano, like reaching into the keys or reaching into the strings and playing, a la George Crumb or John Cage. And some of the composers that she's referencing, she has a version of Pachelbel's canon that's quite popular, but I also hear moments of contrapuntalness in Bach and just the sheer virtuosity of Liszt, and then in her more lyrical pieces there's this sort of warm Debussy-esque lyrical sense. And she talks about this in a clip that I will show next, where she approaches solo playing by treating the piano as an orchestra. So what I've done is I've listed some of her common choices of instruments that she chooses to emulate on the piano. So for the trumpet and trombone, I believe that she's using the technique of slides or bending the pitch to kind of show that on the piano. With the clarinet and bassoon, it's a continuation from the orchestra big band tradition. There's also some melodic passages that feel very vocal inclined, and they have these jazz vocal slides. Double bass for sure, with the stride piano rhythms, that's sort of a reference to a walking bass that you would find in a typical jazz ensemble. And the guitar, I would say specifically when she is going more into rock or pop ballads, where she goes for sort of a metal guitar sound. And then of course percussion. I mean, the rhythm section alone and this like rhythmic drive is present through almost all of her pieces. So I'm going to play a clip of Hiromi speaking about her experience writing this album. Oh wait, I forgot that I have this, which is, this is the only clip I could find. I'm glad that I kept it. But it's the same passage from the Tom and Jerry show that we just heard, but she did an orchestrated version with a symphony in Latvia earlier this year. So you guys can hear how she reorchestrated it for a larger ensemble. how she envisioned taking a solo piano piece and recontextualizing it for a larger ensemble.
I think recording solo piano record is every pianist's dream, and I also wanted to record the sound of my 20s as a solo pianist before I get into 30. By the time this record gets released, I'll be 30, and that was kind of my dream to do a solo piano record every decade to see how I grow up. And when I'm in 20s, I think it's just like life, that you have very energetic youth and also maturity. And I think every essence like this is very precious in music. And I would never be playing like I play right now in 10 years.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, so that's why I have this clip of her talking about it. So, with a small nod to form and analysis, this is the diagram that I made for my lecture document about most, if not all, of her solo piano pieces. She typically has an introductory phrase or section that's about 8 to 16 bars. Then she introduces her primary melodic material, and then she rhythmically develops it, improvises it, and then she transitions from the primary melodic material and then maybe introduces a secondary melody. She continues to weave in both rhythmic and harmonic development of the primary and secondary melodic material, and then she'll return back to the primary melody with an optional coda and ending. I liken this to 19th century character pieces in the sense that there's a programmatic title often, and the structure is there that's classical, but I find that the improvisation is the really big difference here, that it's a tool, in this case, to not only rhythmically develop the primary melodic material, but harmonically extended with new textures, new keys, colors, things like that. So to demonstrate this, I've taken one of her pieces from the Place to Be album titled Sicilian Blues. This piece is about her time in Sicily, and she said she came up with this melody while she was traveling over there. So I'm going to play this melody that she crafted. So Hiromi takes this melody and she adds a new rhythm, and she keeps the melody in the left hand and adds all the harmonization on top in the right hand. And I'm going to switch to reading from my iPad over there because no way I can see that small. Let's see. There we go. So same melody, I'm going to bring it out a little bit just for presentation purposes. I wouldn't normally do this in performance, but it's just to make it very, very clear where the original material is sitting. It's also worth noting that this is section C, so like I said earlier, it takes time for her to introduce the primary melody. The first page and a half is a crazy improvisational section that is notated well for it being like a transcription of what she's playing, but it is absolutely a free improvisation because she's got like groups of 11 and like just all sorts of odd rhythms and things that you wouldn't normally try to meticulously notate. All right, us to a decade-long break that Hiromi takes between composing solo music. She comes back to the keyboard as a soloist in the next album and the current, most recent solo album, Spectra, in 2019. So this album is themed around colors, and this is the album of the 30s. So the most representative change between Place to Be and Spectra is expansion. So everything that we've just heard in both the Tom and Jerry Show, which is her early piece, and in Sicilian Blue, which is her early style of developing solo keyboard rep, she continues to use all of these rhythmic patterns or melodic patterns in Spectra, but they come with a much bigger depth of understanding of what the piano and the pianist can do. So I've also included another shorter clip of Hiromi speaking about this album.
Next, I feel that I have tones, colors in my palette to play, and that's why I wanted to make an album under the concept of the color. And like, for example, maybe 10 years ago when I had to play blue, maybe I had like 3 different blue, but now I have maybe 10.
Yeah, and she does have multiple pieces titled Blue, or Blue included in some of the titles. So, this leads us to Mr. CC, which is the piece that I will be performing in full today. It's about a 6-minute performance, and the CC in question is Charlie Chaplin. So I feel that this is not a true successor to the Tom and Jerry Show, but it does have a similar character and energy between the two pieces. And I find that Mr. CC refines and smooths over some of the technical difficulties of playing the Tom and Jerry Show. It is still very difficult to play, don't get me wrong, but I find that the pieces in her second album they're a little bit more approachable than they were in the first album, because I think she's understanding now that she has intentions to publish these pieces and for other people to share them and perform them. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over on the piano, but I've also included the official short film that is accompanying this piece. And I'm not going to try and sync it up. It's probably going to end earlier than when I finish playing, which is fine. But this is just to provide some fun visuals while I'm playing that are sort of telling the story of the piece from a different perspective. So, this over here.
that video was created by whom, and it was
It was created by a Japanese film director that is personal friends, or like, I shouldn't say personal friends, but collaborators with Hiromi, so it's like stop motion. So it's something that she worked on with and had some input in. Good question. So far, we studied the music behind Hiromi, but Hiromi is a lot more than just the music that she composes and performs. She also has a highly specific style that she's developed over the course of her career. So I'm going to do a very brief historical overview of women's concert fashion from the last 200 or so years. So I've collected a bunch of images of notable women pianists, and you can kind of see in the 19th century that there's a lot of uniformity. They're all women wearing big poofy dresses with long sleeves, and their hair is in a bun, and they have long hair, so it's put back. The biggest indicator of, I would say, differences in concert dress is the accessibility to wealth and resources of what women could wear, what they were kind of allowed to wear on stage because of social etiquettes. Once we get to the 20th century, we start to see a lot more variety and experimentation, but also the creation of new social expectations. As there are more women concert pianists, we start to see looks like pants, long hair that's not in a bun, short hair, shorter sleeves, shorter hemlines. We're starting to see the rules kind of being formed as to whether concert dress constitutes as a uniform or a costume. And something that I argue a bit about in my lecture document is that for women specifically, concert dress has to serve the function of, can you play your piece? So it has to, allow you to do your job, but it also gives you the freedom to sort of show who you are and who you're about based on how you dress yourself, essentially. Like whether you prefer to have your arms totally free, no sleeves, or if you like long drapey fabrics because of the silhouette. We get a little bit of the personality behind the performer through what they wear. And now, in the 21st century, there's a lot more variety, but I would argue that there's a bit of engagement bait going on. With the rise of the internet and social media, women do largely wear whatever they want, but the critical gaze is still present, unfortunately, in the form of online comments and algorithms. So while women have access to a lot of styles, certain social etiquettes are still being observed in the concert space. And that changes between classical music and jazz music. So these are all classical pianists for the most part. They're all classical pianists. So in the classical space, we emphasize more of a formal dress. But if you were to go to most jazz clubs, they dress more casually. And that is not an indicator of any kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not an indicator of, social class, I guess, and that the seriousness of the music denotes the seriousness of the dress, but it's just different expectations for different environments. So I gathered sort of a timeline of Hiromi's style throughout the years. This isn't in total chronological order, but it's essentially. Mostly, she does a lot of crazy things with her hair. As you can see, she's had streaks, she's had a bob, she's had this big teased back bun. She usually has a big smile when she's performing. She uses a lot of fabrics and just lots of color in her clothing. So not to distill her style, but a little bit from this formula. I think from the head up, this is one of my favorite pictures of Hiromi because I think it really shows what she's about. She usually does blunt bangs and a spiky bun with this messy, it's intentionally messy. And the way that it moves on stage is really telling of what she's trying to communicate on stage. Other variants are, like I said, she had a blunt ball with bangs during her solo albums, where she's had a Y2K era spiky bun with colorful streaks, white and red, and then clean and minimal makeup. She's not really someone who she's not putting stuff on her face to take away from what she's doing with her face on stage. And then with the body, she's usually seen in a sleeveless midi dress, midi meaning a little bit over the knees. in either all black or black and white patterns, or she has some kind of short sleeve dress with really colorful patterns and bold hues. She's not afraid of color. Occasionally she may do oversized blouse and pants with like leggings, but the shoes are really a big indicator. She goes for like a dress sneaker, an Oxford shoe. No heels. Not really a person who plays in heels. So, I've collected a few of her style influences and motivations. So the first is defiance of American expectations. Hiromi talks about this in an interview, a Turkish interview actually, several years ago, where someone asked her, how did you come up with your hair? And she said that basically when she was studying at Berkeley, she would give these performances, and then people would come up to her Japanese colleagues and be like, good job on the performance. And she's like, I'm the one who did the performance, why are they not paying attention to me? So she's like, I gotta change my hair and have really crazy looking hair so that they know it's me, that they know who to compliment after the performance. And I think that that's a big indicator of like, she cares a lot about the integrity of her art and attributes that to her personal style. The second thing is like 90s Japanese counterculture. So the inception of big spiky buns comes a bit from the 90s, but of course the history of the hair bun is so much longer than that. But really, I mean, she grew up in the 90s in Japan, and then she moved over to the US in the early 2000s. So the US started to kind of adopt this fashion, and it's had a revival in the last few years. In the 2020s as like a part of Y2K fashion. I would say comfort and miscolored, I talked about this a little bit. Almost all of the clothing that she wears is designed for freedom of movement in the arms while remaining visible enough to be seen over stage lighting. And then I wanted to make a special emphasis on Uehara, who's a Japanese fashion designer. He mainly designs shoes and sneakers, but he does do like couture fashion, and his Hiromi's husband. So she married Uehara in 2006. They met in a fashion show in Milan that she was playing piano for, and then he met her, and not much is known about their public life, but they are married. So I imagine that he probably has some, well, she's gone on record in one interview saying that she does wear his designs, but that interview was over 20 years ago, so not sure if that still reflects who she is today, but it would be remiss not to at least mention him. So that's what I'm talking about from the term of talk about the music, talk about how she dresses, and how she has a very particular style. Now I'm going to wrap up the rest of this presentation on virtuosity. So, solo piano virtuosity is a difficult concept to nail down. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions on what constitutes as a virtuosic piece of music. So while I was researching this, I developed these models as a response to understanding why there's such a wide difference in opinion. And this is, of course, a simplification of what's happening in real life, but I believe essentially that if you were to split it in two ways, in theory and in practice, in theory, virtuosity is seen from the eyes of the scholar or the critic or the teacher. Those are all kind of under the scholar umbrella. And then the performer and the composer. So the composer creates the piece, the performer interprets it, and then the scholar interprets that performance and the score, and also receives that interpretation and then decides whether to engage with it or not. On stage, the role of the scholar is then switched with an audience member. Now, some audience members, of course, can be scholars in their own right, or they can just be casual listeners, but the intent is now the composer creates, the performer performs, executes what's on the page, interprets any artistic markings as it, whatever they choose to do or not do, and then the audience receives that, and then they engage with it and decide whether that is virtuosic or not. So, in the score, these are some of the metrics of performance that I have found that are present in finding virtuosity in solo piano music. And I kind of group them as tests. just fast, flashy music, that there's like this sort of overt virtuosity going on, and that slow pieces aren't capable of being virtuosic. I disagree with that. I think that, for the top of the top, for the top performers, they have to be able to do both. You have to be versatile. So the test that's being performed for playing slower, intense pieces is about how you're able to emotionally connect with the people on stage versus just pure visual spectacle. Pieces that require large hands. This is something that I think is an unspoken sort of barrier to entry. And I talk about this a bit in my lecture document about how people have different ways of compensating or not compensating for pieces that are written for, or that the composer wrote by very big, large hands. But it is a common issue that performers try to deal with if they are trying to interpret these pieces, is if they physically cannot reach them for whatever reason, if they're just smaller or they haven't finished growing yet, maybe they're still a child and they haven't fully developed their body yet. There's much room for how to go about finding virtuosity. And then within the actual theory-based scores themselves, cadenzas are tests of improvisation. Historically, they always have been, although in the classical sphere they've changed to just be long tests of, facility and physical endurance. And then encores are tests of audience knowledge. Hiromi scores definitely fit the bill of being this sort of overtly virtuosic work. I mean, she has fast tempo, she has fast rhythms, lots of notes, lots of chords, things like that. It's a lot of this theatrical style that's really on display here. But she does have some moments in some of her pieces, like Sicilian Blue, that I played earlier, that rely more on intensity in a slower moving melody. And then, okay, perfect. Okay, on the stage, so this is like the theory part, and then this is the in-practice part. On the stage, I find that the audience is looking for essentially three things. They're looking for authenticity, which is a balance, in this case, it's a balance struck between honoring the composer's intentions, the performer's original interpretations. I put original in quotes because we're often borrowing and expanding upon things that we listen to, so derivatives aside. The audience's perception of sincerity is huge. This is often the make or break moment between basically deciding personal taste, whether you like someone based on how they perform. Do they perform in a way that speaks to you, that resonates to you? Do you find that what they're doing is authentic and makes sense to you, or do you find that it's the opposite of that and there's this insincerity happening? And that's where emotional disconnect can occur. There's also a sense of theatricality, and a lot of different pianists come across this in different ways of how they bring larger-than-life expressions in the form of facial gestures, arm gestures, hair physics, things like that. And I'm going to spend the last few minutes of this presentation kind of skipping through and going through one of Hiromi's performances to show all of these things. And then the last thing, of course, is novelty. Audiences want to hear something new and engaging. Even if it's the same music that they've heard before, I think most people are hoping that they're hearing something different and not just the same. So essentially, it's about spectacle. If you provide a sublime spectacle as a performer, the engagement comes in demand, and then you reciprocate that, and it cycles into itself. Performers, like I was saying earlier with the triangle models, it's not a perfect representation. It's more so just understanding that there are multiple groups of people's opinions and perceptions that really define virtuosity, and it is not something that is perfectly defined within the means of academia, I think. So, I'm going to take this out for a second because it's easier to do this. So sorry that the screen is a little bit small, but I'm going to play just bits and pieces and talk through a little bit of this performance of Hiromi from the BBC Proms. I believe this is 2017. So I'm just going to start and let you sort of experience a little bit of how she plays on stage. I'll sing a little bit of it, but just a little bit more. so minutes in, you might be able to guess which piece this is based off of after this part. She's really going in on spectacle here of like. It's Gershwin's I Got Rhythm. And then at the end, I go towards the very end, just so you can see how she really lands an ending in this. I think the two words that really describe Hiromi's playing are joy and whimsy in everything that she does, which is why what she does is so remarkable, because she really just brings something much different than you would expect in typical classical or even jazz circles. So I'm going to wrap up with these two quotes by Hiromi. These are translated from Japanese, but thankfully the news documentary provided translation, so I'm just reading the translated captions. So she talks about live music. She says, I always think of a live music venue as a ship. I'm the captain, and I'm inviting everyone to join us on a musical journey. It's a miracle that we all happen to be on the same ship. And then the interviewer asks later on, what does the piano mean to you? She says, it has so many meanings. Obviously, it's a truly reliable partner. It's also a teacher and a companion in my search for what I love. It also allows me to connect with people. There's no better way to connect with people than through the piano. So that's where I wanted to end things. Yes, this is a picture of me and Hiromi from last year. I didn't get a picture of her this year. She wasn't around for photos, but I did get to just say thanks after seeing her performance in Seattle last year, and I was freaking out on the inside, but I managed to look good for the photo. So thank you so much for